Watched my daughter-in-law slip something into my wife's coffee at our own kitchen table, and I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the hallway half-dressed, holding my reading glasses and watched her do it. That was a Tuesday morning in October, about 6 weeks before my son's promotion party, the one my wife and I had offered to host at our home. The one we'd been planning for months. The one that was supposed to be a celebration. Let me back up. My wife, Lorraine, and I have been married for 39 years. We met at a church potluck in Akron when I was 26 and she was 24, and I knew by the end of that evening that she was the kind of woman a man spends his whole life trying to deserve. She's steady, warm, the kind of person who remembers your birthday and shows up with soup when you're sick and never once makes you feel like a burden for needing her. She raised our son, Owen, mostly on her own for 2 years while I was working long-distance contracts out in Houston. She never complained. Not once. Owen is 34 now. He works in corporate finance in Columbus, makes good money, and last year he married a woman named Serena. I tried to like Serena. I really did. She's intelligent, polished. The kind of woman who reads the room and adjusts herself to it perfectly, so that every person in it feels like she's performing just for them. That's not a compliment. That's a skill. And like most skills, it depends entirely on the intention of the person using it. From the beginning, Lorraine tried. She sent Serena birthday cards with personal notes inside. She asked about Serena's mother, her job, her opinions on things. She went out of her way to learn how Serena took her coffee, oat milk, no sugar, and always had it ready when they visited. Serena received all of it the way a hotel guest receives a mint on a pillow. Politely, briefly, without retention. The first sign something was wrong came about 8 months into the marriage, when Owen mentioned at dinner that Serena had referred to Lorraine as a little clingy. Owen laughed when he said it, like it was a minor, funny observation. Lorraine smiled and said nothing. I watched her face and said nothing either. But I filed it away. The second sign came when Lorraine was diagnosed with early-stage rheumatoid arthritis last spring. It's manageable. She takes medication, does physical therapy twice a week, has good days and harder days, but on the harder days, her hands stiffen badly, and sometimes her hips. The doctor told her to avoid inflammatory foods and stress, 2 things that, as it turned out, were about to become very difficult to avoid. When Owen told Serena about the diagnosis, her response, according to Owen, was, well, she needs to be careful not to use that as an excuse to lean on us too much. Owen told me this over the phone, not realizing how it landed. Or maybe not caring. I'm still not sure which is worse. I let it go. What I could not let go was what I saw that Tuesday morning. Lorraine had been having a flare-up for about a week. Her hands were swollen, she was moving slowly, and she'd been sleeping more than usual. Owen and Serena had come to stay for a long weekend to help finalize the party planning. At least, that was the stated reason. I woke up around 6:30, earlier than usual, and came downstairs to find Serena alone in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter with her back half turned to the doorway, and she was doing something to the mug that I recognized as Lorraine's, the blue one with the small chip on the handle that Lorraine refused to throw away because our daughter had painted it in 6th grade. I stopped in the hallway. Serena opened a small travel-sized container, the kind you'd see in a gym bag or a purse, and tipped something into the mug. A powder, fine and white. She stirred it with the spoon that was already sitting on the counter, then set the mug back exactly where it had been. Then she picked up her phone and started scrolling like nothing happened. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably 15 seconds. My heart was doing something strange in my chest. Not panic, more like a cold, settling clarity. The kind that arrives when something you've been hoping you were wrong about turns out to be exactly what you feared. I didn't walk in. I went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Lorraine still sleeping, and I thought very carefully about what I was going to do. The first thing I did was make a decision. I would not let Lorraine drink that coffee. The second thing I decided was that I would find out exactly what was in that container before I did or said anything else. I went back downstairs through the back staircase, came in through the dining room, and greeted Serena as if I'd just woken up. She smiled and said good morning and asked if I wanted coffee. I said I'd make my own, and I watched her face for any flicker of anything. There was nothing. Just pleasantness. Just that performance. Is that one Lorraine's? I asked, nodding toward the blue mug. Oh, I was just keeping it warm for her, she said. I nodded. I'll bring it up to her. She's still in bed. Something crossed Serena's face. Just for a second. Not guilt. I want to be accurate about this. More like recalculation. She might not be awake yet, she said. That's all right, I said. I'll sit with her. I took the mug. I did not bring it to Lorraine. I brought it to the downstairs bathroom, where I poured most of it carefully into an empty travel shampoo bottle I found under the sink. I kept enough in the mug to look untouched. Then I went upstairs, sat with Lorraine until she woke, and told her I'd already made her a fresh cup in the kitchen when she was ready. 2 days later, while Serena and Owen were at a restaurant for lunch, I drove that shampoo bottle to a pharmacy in Westerville that I knew had a medication identification service. The pharmacist there, a young man who looked like he'd just finished his degree and still had the earnest energy of someone who hasn't been worn down yet, looked at it carefully. He asked me a few questions. He said it could be a couple of things, but based on the texture and the slight smell, he believed it was a high-dose laxative. The kind sold for bowel prep before medical procedures. Completely legal to buy. Absolutely not something you put in someone's coffee without their knowledge. Especially not someone with a chronic inflammatory condition who was already struggling that week and had a party to host in 6 weeks. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for a while. I am 63 years old. I have worked since I was 15. I built a small equipment leasing company over 22 years, sold it at a fair price, and retired 2 years ago with enough to be comfortable for the rest of our lives. I have never once in my life done something I was not prepared to stand behind. I have also never once been the kind of man who makes a scene, who raises his voice in public, or who acts before he thinks. But I am also the man who married Lorraine, and she has never been anything but good. To Owen. To Serena. To everyone she has ever met. So I did not make a scene. I did not confront Serena at the dinner table. I did not call Owen and yell at him about the kind of woman he married. I made a plan. The promotion party was scheduled for the third Saturday in November. Owen had been named a senior vice president at his firm, which was genuinely impressive and genuinely worth celebrating. We had invited 42 people. Lorraine had spent weeks on the details. The catering, the flowers, the seating, the little framed photo display she put together of Owen from childhood through to now. She'd done all of it with her stiff hands and her quiet determination, because that is who she is. The event was to be held in our home's great room, which opens onto the back patio. We'd arranged rental chairs and tables, a full catering setup. The works. Lorraine had a particular chair at the host table, a padded armchair we brought in from the study, because it was the most comfortable for her hip on longer evenings. She'd mentioned it to Owen weeks before the party. He'd nodded and said, of course. About a week before the party, I had a conversation with Owen. Calm. Direct. I told him I needed to speak plainly about some things I'd noticed. I told him about the mug. I told him what the pharmacist said. I watched his face go through several expressions in the span of about 4 seconds. He did not say Serena would never do that. That told me everything I needed to know. What he said instead was that I must have misunderstood what I saw, and that bringing this up right before his party was not helpful, and that Lorraine had always had a hard time accepting that he'd built his own life now. I said, she's your mother, Owen, and she has arthritis, and someone put something in her coffee. He said, I really think you're overreacting, Dad. I said, I hope you're right. I went back inside and found Lorraine arranging place cards at the dining room table, squinting at her handwriting, which has gotten a little shaky on bad days. She looked up and smiled at me and asked if I wanted to help her with the ones for the Hendersons, because she could never remember whether it was 1N or 2. I sat down next to her and picked up a pen. I did not tell her what I'd found. I did not tell her about my conversation with Owen. She had worked too hard on this party, and she deserved to enjoy it without carrying that weight. My job that night, and on the night of the party, was to make sure nothing happened to her. The week of the party, Serena called to ask several questions about the setup, which was unusually engaged of her. She wanted to know the layout of the host table. She wanted to know where each person would be sitting. She asked specifically whether the armchair from the study would be at the table. I said yes. That was the last piece of information I needed. The night before the party, after Lorraine had gone to bed, I went to the great room and looked at the armchair. Then I looked at the rental chairs. Then I thought about what a woman who put powder in a coffee mug might do with 42 people coming to her mother-in-law's house for a celebration her husband was the center of. I moved the armchair. I put it 3 seats to the left of where it had been, next to Lorraine's friend Carol from her book club. I put a plain rental chair where the armchair had been. I adjusted the place cards accordingly. Then I went to bed and I slept better than I had in weeks. The party was a Saturday. The caterers arrived at 2. Lorraine wore a dark green dress she'd bought for the occasion and her good pearl earrings, and she looked beautiful. Owen and Serena arrived at 4, an hour before guests. Owen was in a good mood, relaxed, expansive, the way he gets when he's in his element. Serena was wearing something ivory and structured, and she moved through her house with the comfort of someone who expected to eventually own it. She greeted Lorraine warmly. She complimented the flowers. She walked through the great room, and I watched her eyes find the armchair in its new position. She paused for just a fraction of a second. Then she moved on. 42 guests, a caterer with a very good beef tenderloin, Owen's colleagues who shook my hand and told me what a sharp mind my son had, Lorraine glowing at the center of it, telling stories, laughing, pressing her hand to people's arms the way she does when she wants them to know she means it. Around 7 o'clock, we sat for dinner. Serena sat down in the rental chair. I watched her face as she settled into it, arranging her ivory dress, smiling at something Owen said. She was performing, as always, hosting, almost, even in someone else's home. I watched Lorraine sit down in the armchair beside Carol and lean back into it with a small exhale of relief. She caught my eye from across the table and gave me a look I know very well, the one that means she's happy and she's tired and she's grateful, all at once. I looked back at her for a moment. Then I picked up my water glass. For the first hour of dinner, nothing happened. The tenderloin was excellent. Owen gave a brief speech thanking his firm and his wife and his parents, in that order, and I noticed the order, but did not remark on it. It was around 8:15 when Serena stood up. She stood to reach across the table for the breadbasket, which was slightly out of reach, and she stood fully, both hands on the table, pushing herself up to standing, and the rental chair came with her. Not completely, but enough. Whatever had been applied to that seat, and I had my strong suspicions, had dried in the hours since the guests arrived, and it had done its job. The chair lifted a full 6 inches off the floor before Serena caught herself, both hands now gripping the table, eyes wide, expression entirely unguarded for the first time I had ever seen it. The sound was, I'll be honest with you, significant. The kind of sound that pauses 42 conversations simultaneously. Serena pulled. The chair held. One of Owen's colleagues directly across from her had the particular misfortune of having a front row seat and the reflex of looking exactly where a sound comes from. He looked. Then he looked away very quickly. But not before the woman next to him looked too. Serena's ivory dress was doing its best. It was a well-made garment. But superglue. If that is indeed what she had used, and I have no evidence beyond what a reasonable person might infer, does not negotiate with fabric or price points. The sound when the dress finally released was the kind that carries. Lorraine's hand went to her mouth. Carol grabbed her arm. Around the table, the reaction moved in a wave, some people looking away, some unable to, the sudden industrious attention paid by several guests to their plates. Serena stood very still in the way. A person stands when they're trying to process something faster than it is processing. Owen was on his feet beside her in an instant, jacket off, and wrapped around her before most people had registered what happened. He loves her. Whatever else I think about the situation, he does love her, and that was real. They excused themselves, quickly, quietly. I did not say anything. Lorraine leaned toward me about 30 seconds later and said, very softly, "What just happened?" I said, "I'm not entirely sure." She looked at me for a long moment with those steady eyes she has, the ones that have always seen more than she lets on, and then she patted my hand and went back to her conversation with Carol. The party continued. The caterers brought out dessert, a very good chocolate lava cake, and people found their footing again, the way people do at parties when something strange has happened, and everyone decides collectively to move forward. By 9 o'clock, the mood had recovered entirely, and by 10, when the last guests were leaving, several people told me it was one of the best dinner parties they'd attended in years. Owen and Serena did not come back to the table. They stayed in the guest room, and I heard them talking through the door at some point, though I couldn't make out the words. I did not try very hard to. The next morning, Sunday, Owen came downstairs early. Lorraine was still asleep. I was at the kitchen table with coffee, and I had made enough for him. He sat down. We didn't speak for a while. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard, and then it stopped. Owen said, "Did you know?" I said, "Know what?" He looked at me the way he used to when he was 12, and suspected I'd done something to preserve his dignity without him asking me to. Something between irritated and grateful. Mostly grateful. He said, "The chair." I said, "I rearranged the seating the night before. I wanted your mother to have the most comfortable spot. She's been having a hard few weeks." Owen was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "She told me," he said finally, "that it was a joke, that she was just, that she hadn't thought it through." "Owen," I said. "I know," he said. "Your mother has arthritis," I said. "She's been managing a flare for 3 weeks. She made 42 place cards by hand because she wanted the night to be perfect for you. If she had sat in that chair—" "I know, Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the second word just slightly. He's 34 years old, and I watched him look at his coffee and understand something that I think he had been working very hard not to understand for a long time. We didn't have a dramatic conversation after that. That's not who we are. He asked me if I would talk to his mother with him, and I said that was his conversation to have, not mine to manage. He nodded. He said he needed to do some thinking. I said I thought that was the right instinct. Before he left that afternoon, he hugged Lorraine for a long time at the front door. She held him with both arms the way she always has since he was small. She didn't know the whole story then, but she knew something had shifted, because she is Lorraine, and she knows everything eventually. I told her the full story 2 weeks later, on a Sunday evening, when we were sitting on the back porch with decaf and a blanket across her lap. I told her about the mug and the pharmacist and what I'd done with the armchair. I told her all of it, quietly, without dramatizing it, the way I tried to do most things. She sat with it for a while. Then she said, "You should have told me." I said, "I know, I'm sorry." She said, "I'm not fragile." "I know that too," I said. "You're the least fragile person I've ever met." She looked out at the yard. The oak tree replanted when Owen was born had gone yellow for fall, almost fully now, the leaves coming down slow in the evening light. "Is she still in his life?" she asked. "They're still married," I said. He's working through it." "I hope he does," she said, not bitterly, just honestly. "He's a good man. He just forgot that for a while." I reached over and took her hand, the one with the swollen knuckle on the middle finger, the one she worries about. She let me hold it. We sat there until the light went and the air got too cold. I don't know what the right lesson is here. I'm 63 years old, and I've learned enough to know that most situations don't have clean lessons. They just have people making choices, and then living inside those choices for a long time after. What I know is that I married a woman worth protecting. I know that protecting someone doesn't always look like standing between them and the danger. Sometimes it looks like quietly moving a chair the night before a party and saying nothing about it. And I know that when Lorraine leaned back into that armchair on the night of the party and exhaled and looked across the table at me, that was enough. That was all of it, right there. That was the whole 39 years. There's a version of this story where I walk into that kitchen, slam my hand on the counter, and tell Serena exactly what I saw. Where I raise my voice and make her account for herself right there, with the coffee still warm and Owen still asleep upstairs. I used to think that version would have felt better. I don't think that anymore. What I've come to understand, slowly, the way you understand most things that matter, is that how you respond to someone's worst behavior says more about your own character than anything you could ever say about theirs. I'm not talking about being passive. I'm not talking about looking away. I held what I knew, I verified it carefully, and I acted on it in a way that protected Lorraine without humiliating anyone publicly. Before I had the full picture. That took more out of me than a confrontation would have. Restraint, real restraint, is not weakness. It is the hardest thing a person can practice. Lorraine has it naturally. That's what I keep coming back to. She spent years extending genuine warmth to a woman who received it as an inconvenience, and she never once turned bitter about it. She just kept being herself. Steady, present, particular about her handwriting on place cards. And that steadiness is a kind of moral strength I don't think I could have invented in her. It was already there. You can see it in the way she held Owen at the front door that Sunday afternoon, knowing something had shifted without knowing exactly what, and holding him anyway. That's not naivety. That's a woman who decided a long time ago what kind of person she intended to be, and has simply never stopped being it. Owen is going to have to do some harder work. The moment I watched something cross his face, when I told him about the mug, not disbelief, just reluctance, that told me he already knew more than he admitted to himself. The willingness to see clearly, even when your seeing is uncomfortable, even when it implicates someone you love, that kind of honest thinking doesn't come easily. It has to be chosen, repeatedly, against the pressure to look away. I hope he chooses it. I believe he will, eventually. He did not get the easy path to that understanding. But then again, easy paths rarely lead anywhere worth going. As for me, I'm 63 and I moved a chair. That's the whole of my heroism in this story, and I'm at peace with that. What I know is that I paid attention when it mattered. I didn't react. I observed, confirmed, and responded with the only thing I could actually control, which was the arrangement of the room. And Lorraine got to sit in her armchair and exhale and look across the table at me with those eyes of hers. That look cost me nothing and was worth everything. I think about what it takes to get through a long life with your integrity intact. Not just your reputation, not just your finances, but the actual interior of who you are. It takes a kind of moral seriousness about small decisions, the ones nobody is watching. It takes the willingness to think clearly when your emotions are loudest. And it takes the endurance to stay in it, to keep showing up for the people you love, to keep making the careful choice day after day, even when it would be easier to either explode or simply disappear. Lorraine has given me 39 years of that example. The least I can do is move a chair.